Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. Not sure if this is working. It says it is. Bismillah. Either way, it'll get recorded. So, starting off, first video in this series on the introduction to Imam al-Shafi'i's Madhhab. We're going to start essentially with talking about Imam al-Shafi'i's biography, and this will likely be one of the longest videos in this. The rest of them will be much shorter. So let's get started. Now, who exactly was Imam al-Shafi'i, and what made him different from the other Imams, and most importantly, what can we see in Imam al-Shafi'i's own life that demonstrates to us the sort of features that would come into place later in his madhab. You can actually catch some glimpses of that when you look at his life, because obviously those sort of things that happened in his life, the way his learning journey occurred, undoubtedly impacted his fiqh, and as a result as well, not only did it impact his fiqh, but also it resulted in later scholars who got that impact from his fiqh. They incorporated sort of those same understandings into his into the madhab itself. So Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i rahimahullah, that was his name, and as you can see from the notes posted here on your screen, that Imam al-Shafi'i had some link to his lineage was essentially Arab, and 4 people in his lineage were all Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And As-Sa'ib, who is seen here in red, I've highlighted the companions in red on the slides. As-Sa'ib became Muslim after being captured as a POW in Badr, a prisoner of war. And so essentially, but he was not the first to convert. Okay, it was his father before him. It was not his father before him. He converted first, and then his father afterwards. And Hashim here, and this is what becomes important now. When we say Ibn Hashim ibn Abdul Muttalib ibn Abd Manaf, specifically here, Hashim is the cousin of Abdul Muttalib here. He is not the Hashim who was the grandfather of the great grandfather, it should say. This is an error. Here's the cousin Abdul Muttalib. Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet ﷺ. No, it's not an error, sorry. Not Abdul Muttalib's father. Okay, Abdul Muttalib's father, Hashim, we say Banu Hashim, the family of the Prophet ﷺ, and as we'll get to, also the lineage of Imam al-Shafi'i. Abdul Muttalib's, this is not Abdul Muttalib's father, the Hashim mentioned here. The Hashim mentioned here is the cousin of Abdul Muttalib. Now, Abdul Manaf, is where the lineage of Imam al-Shafi'i meets that of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the lineage of Imam al-Shafi'i meets that of the lineage of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the level of Abdul Manaf. However, of course, this as we'll analyze this little sort of connection between the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam very soon with the family of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Imam al-Shafi'i still, as we can see from here, is the only one of the 4 Imams who was from the tribe of Quraysh. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, people are followers of the Quraysh in this religion. Their believers are followers of their believers. Their disbelievers are followers of their disbelievers. People are like ma'adin, like sources of metals or precious metals. The best of them in ignorance are the best of them in Islam if they acquire fiqh. So the best of those before Islam are going to be the best after Islam if they acquire fiqh specifically. Okay, and we can sort of apply this to the family of the Quraysh in general, for example. Okay, not all of them, most of them at least, in the sense that when they acquired fiqh, they became better people as a result. And it's partially because of who they were before Islam. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said about the descendants of al-Muttalib, sorry, the children of Hashim and of al-Muttalib are one. Okay, and this was due to how much they supported and loved each other before and after Islam. Now, based on this hadith, okay, the children of Hashim and of al-Muttalib are one. Because of this hadith, Imam al-Shafi'i and later scholars in the Madhhab considered both the children of Hashim and Muttalib to be from the family of the Prophet ﷺ too. Now, I haven't checked if this is the case in other madhahib. This is the problem would be, whoa. Yeah, this is my inexperience speaking here. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure exactly what this says. The stream's current bitrate. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Maybe I need to get somebody else to arrange this stuff for me. Anyways, I'll close that for now. So, Imam al-Shafi'i is not only the only Qurashi Imam, but he is also from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, at least according to the Shafi'i madhab. Now, I haven't checked, I'm not sure about the other madhahib, what they say on this issue, but as far as Shafi'is are concerned, Imam al-Shafi'i is also from the family of the Prophet ﷺ. He is not just from Quraysh as well. Now, then, Imam al-Shafi'i, so getting into his actual life, Imam al-Shafi'i was born 150 Hijri and he passed away 201 Hijri, so he only lived a duration of 51 years. But as we're going to go through, he accomplished a lot in his life, rahmallah. So he was born in Gaza, or Ascalon, one of the two. The same year that Imam Abu Hanifa passed away, his father had moved there from Medina. Okay, so his father, as we mentioned, was from Quraysh. He is also from the family of the Prophet ﷺ, and he had moved there from Medina, and he passed away in Gaza, leaving Imam al-Shafi'i as an orphan. His mother took him back to Mecca, and he grew up there in poverty. His main passions as a youth were archery and, of course, learning as well. His family was not known for learning nor wealth, obviously, because he was an orphan. He did not have much in the way of money. Rather, it was his mother's persistence on him learning and making him into a scholar that was key to his progress. So he said, rahmallah, I was an orphan in the care of my mother. She had nothing that she could give to my teacher as payment, but the teacher was content with me taking his place in his absence as a Quran teacher for children. When I finished memorizing the Quran, I entered the masjid and used to sit with the ulama memorizing hadith and fiqh. I wrote hadith and fiqh on bones. We had a large old jar, and whenever I had filled the space on a bone, I put it in the jar. Jar, of course, according to their standards back then, not the jar we think of today. But here we see that this was a time where most likely Muslims would have required more access to writing materials beyond bones, for example, in leaves. You see more in the history of the Quran that the original Sahaba used to write on bones and leaves, though they were more using those as writing materials. However, at this point, it's more likely Muslims would have had much more access to leather and different types of writing materials. I'm not sure exactly when Muslims had access to paper, though. But in this case, specifically, Imam al-Shafi'i was still using bones, and he was using used ones, essentially. He would wash off the old writing, and he would reuse those materials, and again, because of his poverty. So he would write on old bones and discarded leather because of his inability to afford writing material. And in Mecca, he had some teachers as well. He had two ulama, right? Imam Muslim al-Zanji and Imam Sufyan ibn Uyayna, rahmahumullah. He used to study with them, and he was given permission. They gave him permission to give fatwa when he was still during his teens. There's a story actually where Imam al-Shafi'i was asked a question, and he said it was to do with, I think, something to do with seminal fluid, I think. And he was asked a question, and he said, I can't answer that question because basically I haven't, reached the age of puberty yet, so I can't really tell you much about that. So during this period, he became passionate about studying Arabic literature and language, okay, and he used to travel to Bedouin tribes. Okay, that was the way how you would study Arabic back then. There were no grammar textbooks or anything. To learn Arabic, you would go to the people who spoke Arabic and acquire language directly for them. And during this time also, there were students of the Arabic language who would eventually become scholars of them, who were doing the same thing as well. That's how the earliest scholars of the Arabic language acquired their language rules and skills. For example, they went to Arabic tribes to learn their poetry and learn their language and experience their language. Now, were it not for the advice of some of his elders, Imam al-Shafi'i mentions that he would have become a specialist in Arabic instead. And this was because of his remarkable skill and his sort of attention to Arabic. And you see this now. Now, this emphasis we see here, Imam al-Shafi'i's emphasis on the Arabic language, this eventually percolates down not just into his madhhab, but into fiqh as a whole. The emphasis becomes on the integralness, of the Arabic language to fiqh, usul al-fiqh, for example, how to do fiqh. Okay, in Arabic language skills become an essential part of that, partly, of course not the only reason, partly because of the legacy of Imam al-Shafi'i with regards to the Arabic language. Now, after hearing of Imam Malik's Muwatta, who was teaching, Imam al-Shafi'i was in Mecca, Imam Malik's in Muwatta at the same time, and Imam Malik's teaching from his Muwatta, Imam al-Shafi'i hears about it, he borrows a copy, he couldn't afford his own, and he committed it to memory. Okay, he committed the entire book to memory, and while still in his teens, he then traveled to Medina to meet him. Now, the permission to give fatwa here as a short notice, it doesn't necessarily mean that poetry here fatwa here was like, to a high level. Of course, he wasn't a scholar in a sense, but he was like a junior student of knowledge who was at least able to give religious advice to people. Then in Medina, Imam al-Shafi'i insisted on reading to Imam Malik directly. Okay, and now Imam Malik, as is usually the case, and this is where a lot of students, I'm going to point out these lessons as we go along. Okay, a lot of people, when they go study abroad or they want to study with ulama, they want to study with the biggest ulama first. Okay, they want to study with the top scholars, and unfortunately, that's usually, not always, it's usually an unrealistic sort of vision. Okay, you have to sort of work your way up to the more senior teachers. Not always, but that's usually the case. Okay, or at least you should study with, junior scholars first in order to get a grounding, and then you can understand the classes of the senior scholar. Imam al-Shafi'i was different in this case. He was first advised to study with a student, Imam Malik. However, afterwards, when Imam Malik heard Imam al-Shafi'i recite the Muwatta, he was really impressed and he allowed him to read to him directly. So Imam Malik, rahimahullah, essentially, as soon as he recognized Imam al-Shafi'i's ability and his sort of, his level in the Arabic language and his level of knowledge and understanding already, he allowed him to study directly with him and bypass that sort of initial training process with one of his students. During this time, he continued to visit Arab tribes to learn the language, okay, and he said, I did not continue learning Arabic except to strengthen my fiqh. And again, this shows the emphasis that was inspired by Imam al-Shafi'i into the madhhab itself and to later scholars about the importance of the Arabic language in not just understanding the Quran and Sunnah, but in doing fiqh, in extracting from the Quran and Sunnah, and really understanding what the Quran and Sunnah are telling us in terms of the laws and the Sharia and how to apply them in real life. So Imam al-Shafi'i spent a total of 16 years with Imam Malik in Medina until he passed away, the longest he would stay in one place after Mecca. So after Mecca, this is the longest Imam al-Shafi'i stays with anyone and in any place, and essentially it's with Imam Malik in Medina. Now at this level, at this time point, Imam al-Shafi'i is mostly a Maliki scholar. In fact, he is a Maliki. He gives fatwa that are according to the Maliki madhhab. He uses the Muwatta, okay, as well, and that's what he's known for at this particular point. Now, during this time, okay, while he's living in Medina, he still comes from a relatively poor background. So Imam al-Shafi'i grew up in poverty. He had to occasionally engage in trade to earn a living. So he traveled to Yemen as a local government administrator after Medina to earn money for his studies. So he wanted to study more, and one of his poems sort of indicates that as well, that one of the necessities of a student of knowledge is they need to have access to money or income in order to study. He may also have worked there as a judge too. Okay, we're not exactly sure what he did, but he worked as some capacity with the government. He was 29 years old, and he may have previously traveled there for work when he was 17. There's a lot of details in between that there's a difference of opinion or perhaps some sort of vagueness about exactly what happened. After Yemen, he was assigned to a post in Najran, a former Christian town, and here he encountered some Christians and asked them about the jizya. Now, this is interesting because Imam al-Shafi'i had direct contact with Christians, and he lived in a Christian town, and he was able to understand some of these rulings to do with, Muslim, non-Muslim relations in that context. So the tribes Banu al-Harith and Banu Thaqif lived there, and he spent time with the Bedouins of their tribes too, still learning Arabic. In Yemen, Najran, Imam al-Shafi'i continued to learn from local scholars. He was not there in time for Imam al-Awza'i. However, he studied with some of his students. Sorry, Imam al-Awza'i was elsewhere. And in one of his rulings, he took the side of the plaintiffs against the caliphs. Now, this is an important event in the sense that this is the reason eventually why Imam Shafi'i moves to Iraq and studies with Imam Abu Hanifa. So he took the side of basically the people in court against the caliph. And you have to sort of understand the political landscape at that time and how the Abbasids came to power, which is essentially the time Imam Shafi'i was living in. But essentially, due to his status as Ahlul Bayt and him supporting a case against the caliph, this caused the authorities in Iraq to suspect him of treason. Because there was a lot of that initial sort of very early Shi'i Sunni tension back in the past. And they were involved in the Abbasid uprising too. So there was still a lot of political tension around these issues. So the governors in Iraq, the authorities in Iraq, began to suspect him. There might be some sort of issue here with regards to treason or sedition involved. So he was forcibly taken at the age of 34. He was forcibly taken to Iraq to answer for his sedition charges. Now the Khalifa, however, Harun al-Rashid, forgave him on his sedition charges. The most likely, Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, rahimahullah, one of the most prominent students of Imam Abu Hanifa, he was likely responsible for this. And Imam al-Shafi'i was given 50,000 dinars by the Caliph, which he used to spend on his family. So, subhanAllah, he traveled to earn an income. He went through some difficulties, and in the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives the righteous, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. So they had likely met each other earlier in Medina with Imam Malik, because Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, rahimahullah, he also studied with Imam Malik and as well, and they likely had met earlier. So after this ordeal, Imam al-Shafi'i remained in Iraq, studying with Imam al-Shaybani and other notable scholars like Imam Waqi ibn al-Jarrah, which is the source of this famous story of his memorization skills. Now, Imam Malik's lessons, and this, shows the variety of teachings or teaching methods that were there during that time, and how different teachers conduct themselves differently, different scholars conduct themselves differently, just inside their classrooms or inside their learning circles. So Imam Malik's lessons were usually in the format of lectures, right? You go there, you listen, it's very quiet, and you just sort of learn and walk away. Now, the scholars in Iraq, though, had a method of teaching that involved debate and discussion, raised voices, discussing. Not sure who's watching at the moment, but essentially, if you try to look for Sheikh Muhammad, Sheikh Dadu's recordings on his lessons, if you know who that is, you try to look at the ones he gives in Mauritania, you'll find that it's very noisy, to the point sometimes he has to ask people to quiet down. This likely had a great effect on Imam al-Shafi'i, as we see in his book, records of his debates with others, including the Mu'tazila. So in Ar-Risala, which is Imam al-Shafi'i's book on Usul al-Fiqh, you can see evidence of him having, some of the parts of the book are essentially him debating with people, and he did debate some of the Mu'tazila, which he likely encountered in Iraq. Now, Imam al-Shafi'i stayed in Baghdad until Imam al-Shaybani passed away. So again, he recognized the worth of that teacher, and he stayed with him as long as he could until he passed away. And he considered both these scholars, Imam Malik and Imam Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani, to be those most deserving of the title of his teachers. Not only did he spend a long time with them, he definitely loved them greatly, and he benefited a lot from their knowledge. Now, just a short note here on Imam al-Shafi'i debating the Mu'tazila. So oftentimes Imam al-Shafi'i gets quoted for his condemnation of kalam, which is quite correct. He did indeed do that. However, Imam al-Shafi'i did not encounter the kalam of what happened 2 centuries later, almost after. Rather, he encountered the kalam of the early Mu'tazila and of course other groups as well. And that's what his sort of criticism was directed towards. As for later kalam, لا ينسب إلى الساكت قول. So we do not, we cannot say for sure what Imam al-Shafi'i would have thought about the eventual kalam that occurred within his madhab. Now, so far, we've gone from Mecca to Medina, and then Yemen, and now Iraq, right? And then after Iraq, after Muhammad Hassan Shaybani rahmallah passes away, Imam al-Shafi'i moves back to Mecca, and here we see some evidence now of unique thinking. Okay, unique thinking. He's not a Maliki anymore. He's not a Hanafi either. There is something else happening. He was saying independent thinking on fiqh, his formation as a mujtahid mutlaq, an independent mujtahid, an independent scholar who is able to look at the Quran and Sunnah, come up with his own rulings that are independent of other scholars. He started teaching and giving fatwa based on his own methods, not of his teachers. Okay, so he had Imam Malik had his methods, Imam Abu Hanifa and his student has his methods, and now he's not using their methods, he's thinking of his own methods in fiqh. And this is what defines a mujtahid, that it's not just that they have their own fiqh, they have their own methods in fiqh, they have their own usul or methodology, and that's what differentiates them and makes them a higher level of scholar than scholars after them. And that's why, to be honest, for the most part, that level is, you can't really replicate it, because you need that sort of closeness, both temporal and knowledge, epistemic and temporal. You need that proximity to the time of the Prophet ﷺ and to the Quran and Sunnah in order to come up with that sort of independent way of thinking. So he started teaching and giving fatwa based on his own methods. And Ibn Kathir, rahmallah, he records about 180 differences for Imam Malik and Imam Hassan al-Shaybani. Okay, I'm not sure how accurate that is, but that's what Imam Ibn Kathir recorded. His sessions used to be between the well of Zamzam and the Mizab, which is the spout of the Kaaba. With the spout, sorry, the from the ceiling, right, where the water comes out. His most prominent students and associates in Mecca were Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Imam Ishaq ibn Rahuya. These are the most famous students he had when he was in Mecca at this point, and this stage is considered the beginning of his al-Madhhab al-Qadim, i.e. his old madhab. So for Shafi'is, okay, when we talk about Imam al-Shafi'i's fiqh views, he had his madhab, which was in Mecca first, and his madhab, or in Iraq as well, and his madhab later in Egypt, in which he revised quite many of his views. There's a terminological sort of difference, but it's also important in understanding sort of the variations in Imam al-Shafi'i's fiqh. So, just Imam al-Shafi'i and Imam Ahmad, there are many statements of praise by Imam Ahmad of Imam al-Shafi'i. Okay, he said, "There is a man here from Quraysh who has clarity and realization." He was asked who, and he replied, "Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i." For, as we're going to get to, the scholars of hadith saw Imam al-Shafi'i as sort of finally an answer to the criticisms against them that they weren't really good at fiqh, or they could not be good at fiqh. Imam al-Shafi'i finally provided that sort of clarity and that sort of methodology that they could use to use hadith and arrive at their own fiqh, being scholars of hadith. So a student encountered him in Mecca and tried to ask him for a hadith, but he replied, "Be silent. If you miss out on a hadith with a short chain, you can find it with a longer one, and that will not harm you in your intellect or religion." Now, this is very important. Priorities when it comes to studying. Okay, sometimes there are scholars or lessons or programs that are not going to always be there, and you want to get to them, you want to utilize them before they're gone. And you have to be able to prioritize your time, knowing what to study, who to study with, when to study, okay, and what to prioritize as well. All this, very important, comes into curriculum management, etc. But if you miss out on this young man, then I fear you will not find it again until the last day. I have not seen anyone with a deeper understanding of the Book of Allah than this young man. When asked who he meant, he said, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i. Okay, so again, prioritizing our learning at certain points. What do we learn first? We maximize our benefit. What is evident from such accounts is that Imam al-Shafi'i was not just teaching as a scholar of hadith or a scholar of Quran. He was teaching something different. He was teaching as a faqih. He was teaching the scholars, these literally scholars of hadith, he was teaching them how to understand the Quran and Sunnah. These are already scholars of hadith. Imam Ahmad, well known. Imam Ishaq ibn Rahuya as well. They already had hadith with them. What they got from Imam al-Shafi'i was a way to utilize that, to understand that. And this is why it's not sufficient to just have access to those books or even memorize many hadith. You need to know how to use them. And it's not just usul al-fiqh. You need to sit with the fuqaha, learn from the fuqaha, learn from the fuqaha of old and new, and understand how they use Quran and Sunnah as opposed to how, people use them in everyday life. So Imam Ahmad is considered one of the narrators of the old madhhab. This madhhab al-qadim we mentioned. Imam Ahmad is considered one of the narrators, as in the Shafi'is actually use some of his statements about what Imam al-Shafi'i said as evidence in the madhhab itself. As for Imam Ishaq bin Rahuya, he was introduced to Imam al-Shafi'i by Imam Ahmad. He said, one day we were in Mecca when Imam al-Shafi'i and Ahmad ibn Hanbal were there, and Ibn Hanbal said to me, Abu Yaqub, study with this man. And he said, what is the point if he is the same age as us? And he said, should I abandon these other older scholars and should I study with this younger person instead? And he said, what would be to you? You'll miss out on this and you won't miss out on that. Essentially, this is something crucial. Okay, those older scholars you can study with later, but this is somebody special. Even if he's the same age as us, it doesn't matter. Okay, he has something we don't. We should learn from him and study with him instead. And later he said, Imam Ishaq bin Rahuya, after Imam Shafi'i passed away, he said, no one spoke with the intellect in fiqh or in the same way. And he mentioned Athawri, Al-Awza'i, Malik, and Abu Hanifa, except that Shafi'i was more aligned with sacred text and made less mistakes. Now, of course, that's his opinion. Of course, other madhabs and other scholars may not agree with that. So Imam Ishaq bin Rahuya did not spend much time with him. After he passed away, he said, many of those of understanding of the Quran said that he was the most knowledgeable of his time in the meanings of the Quran and he was understanding in it, as in he possessed deep understanding in the Quran. If I had known that, I would have continued with him. And essentially, after this period, Imam al-Shafi'i began to attain great fame. Now the scholars of Hadith know about him, the Hanafis know about him in Iraq. The Madinans, of course, already knew about him. In 195 Hijri, at the age of essentially 45, Imam al-Shafi'i left for Baghdad again to pursue the companionship of the scholars there. At this point, the Hijaz may have begun to stagnate slightly, whereas before it was basically where all of scholarship was, and now it began to stagnate a little bit in its culture of learning, and he moved on to greener pastures. This time Imam al-Shafi'i returned as a teacher. So before he came as a student, now he returns to Iraq as a teacher and a scholar. He engages in debates with the Ahl Ra'i, basically the Hanafis, those following a more reason-based approach, although how true is this division between Ahl Ra'i and Hadith? That's a whole discussion for another time. In Iraq, Imam al-Shafi'i began to record his method in a book called Al-Risala. This is the old Al-Risala, not the new one that is in print nowadays. He also wrote a book in fiqh called Al-Hujjah. He developed a philosophy, what we call usul al-fiqh today, of extracting fiqh from the Quran and Sunnah, that finally gave the method of the scholars of hadith. The scholars of hadith had a method at arriving at fiqh, or some sort of way, and he finally sort of clarified what this method is, and he used it as a means to present an intellectual foundation to the fiqh of the scholars of hadith that could now be used to counter, or at least use as a different way of talking about fiqh than the Hanafi madhab. Now the Risala itself, and this shows this point about the purpose of Imam al-Shafi'i's sort of hadith-centric fiqh methodology. The Risala itself was in response to the request of a hadith scholar, Imam Abdurrahman ibn Mahdi, whose goal was to try and articulate and defend his positions in fiqh. He wanted a way to try and justify how he was talking about the Quran and Sunnah, how he was using them, and Imam al-Shafi'i provided that in the form of a book. So Imam al-Shafi'i is considered the founder of the Ahlul Hadith method in fiqh. This I'll talk about later, maybe in a different video, in a different session in the future, inshallah. So he's considered the founder of the Ahlul Hadith method in fiqh. And again, Ahlul Ra'i, Ahlul Hadith, how different are they? This is a discussion that again is a separate topic. It was said when Imam al-Shafi'i came to the main masjid in Baghdad, there were 20 circles of the Ahlul Ra'i. After 2 weeks, there were only 3 or 4 left. So Imam al-Shafi'i seemed to return this sort of more hadith-centric method of fiqh back to sort of Iraq during his time. Imam Ahmad, who met him again here, said the legal decisions for the scholars of hadith were in the hands of the Hanafi scholars, and this did not change until al-Shafi'i came onto the scene. He had the deepest understanding of the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It was not sufficient for him to have a limited understanding of hadith. So now, of course, this is not meant to be the Ahnaf have their own ways of using hadith, their own methodology in fiqh. The purpose of all this is not to say anything about the Hanafi madhhab, of course. It's a madhhab agreed upon by the ummah. However, this is Imam Ahmad. Again, those who are scholars of hadith sympathize more with Imam al-Shafi'i's method in general of doing fiqh. And it's clear that Imam Ahmad understood this distinction and he commented on it. So a number of scholars here who studied with Imam al-Shafi'i, and these are considered the narrators of Imam al-Shafi'i's al-Madhhab al-Qadim, his old madhhab. And very interesting statement here by Za'farani. He said the Ahlul Hadith were asleep until Imam al-Shafi'i awoke them. So Imam al-Shafi'i, almost by giving method and by giving usul and by giving some sort of clarification to how fiqh should be extracted from the Quran and Sunnah, and exactly how to articulate that and condense that and talk about it in a way that is intellectually sort of challenging and conclusive and foundational. This is something that Imam al-Shafi'i basically helped the scholars of hadith to do. So that's why he earned this sort of title of Nasr al-Sunnah, although to be honest I'm not sure exactly how old that is. Now after this, so we've got started from Mecca. Imam al-Shafi'i born in Gaza, his mother brought him to Mecca, and then Medina, Yemen, Iraq again, and then Mecca, back again, and then now finally Egypt. Okay, so after everything, Imam al-Shafi'i briefly, after Baghdad, Imam al-Shafi'i briefly leaves for Mecca just for a bit. Then he returns to Baghdad again until 199 Hijri. Then he moves to Egypt. Okay, so and he told a student, and this is just a historical, little tidbit, I guess, that he told the student, if you have not seen Baghdad, you have not seen the world. And this is something interesting. The metropolitan and sort of, the diversity of cultures and languages and, different people in Baghdad, okay, this was becoming the center of the civilized, cultured world at that point. Baghdad would have meant that people were exposed to many different viewpoints, many different things, many different ideas, many different cultures, many different experiences. And this is essentially Imam al-Shafi'i, the anthropologist, speaking here. And again, Imam al-Shafi'i is one of the most well-traveled of the four scholars in fiqh. Not the only one, but one of the most well-traveled. And it's obvious that this also led to his sort of very unique mindset in approaching things and allowed him to be this very independent thinker who was able to sort of, go away from these Medinan and Iraqi sort of Kufan ways of thinking about fiqh. So the reasons for this move to Mecca, we're not sure. Again, there's a lot of movings around in Imam al-Shafi'i's history. Okay, there's a lot of travel going on, and travel is very hard back then. But it's why exactly were these movements happening? We're not sure. Besides personal, things like trade and business and whatever not, it's most likely these are continuing political issues in the Abbasid world at the time. But again, this is something that it's hard to establish exactly why, because the information we have is sparse and not everything is recorded in detail. Imam al-Shafi'i had attracted a lot of attention in Baghdad. He was also Qurashi, Ahlul Bayt, as we mentioned. So this might have had some reason as to why, the political tensions in Iraq would have made it safer for him to leave. You had this sort of, this upcoming Mu'tazili Inquisition, or at least the build up to it was starting. And it's likely that he might have moved because of that. Allah knows best. Now, he was also against the Mu'tazila and their kalam. Okay, so he also had debates with them. And again, the Inquisition that was coming up, the Abbasid, the Abbasids were already, they already had like a lot of political tensions based on sectarian issues. And on top of that, now the Mu'tazila and their views are spreading as well within the sort of the royal court. So Imam al-Shafi'i's feeling uncomfortable there. Another reason could be a search for better teachers or students. Either way, Imam al-Shafi'i made his way to Egypt. at the age of 49, where the political situation was relatively calm and the madhabs of Imam al-Layth ibn Sa'ad and senior Maliki scholars dominated. And of course, the Malikis dominated at that point in Egypt, and then eventually they were taking their fiqh westwards into Africa. So obviously here we see some importance of political and financial safety and security for scholarly activity, right? And it's, something that's been largely understood by most of I have posts on this in the Usul scholars, governments in the past largely understood this, and they helped to establish those social safety nets in order for scholarly activity to occur. After 199 Hijri, Imam al-Shafi'i moved to Egypt, where he lived until he passed away. Now here he taught his most famous students, arguably famous students. Okay, at least for Shafi'is, they're his most famous students, because we use this to, they wrote books that were used throughout Shafi'i curriculums later on. So he wrote books, the Risala and the which are published today. If you buy that, you're essentially buying, or if you have that, or if you've seen that, you're essentially looking at his new books that were written in Egypt, his Madhhab al-Jadid. Imam al-Shafi'i also studied with scholars in Egypt, absorbing again a new fiqh, which is a fiqh of Imam Layth ibn Sa'ad. Now, the study of style with Imam al-Shafi'i, he had acquired the sort of benefits from the sort of very dialectical, conversational style of study from the Hanafis. Books would be brought to him to review and discuss, and he would write his own at the same time. It was a very research-oriented program that Imam al-Shafi'i had running in Egypt, almost like a critical study research department today. So you had discussions, you had debates, you had people writing down things. He would write down things as well. His students would coordinate with other students to record his knowledge and teach each other what they missed. There's a lot of academic, educational activity going on, and Imam al-Shafi'i passed away in 201 Hijri. This is in 2 years. In 2 years, so much is going on. Imam al-Shafi'i, as we know from some of the narrations about him, was very keen on how he used his time, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to implement such things in our own lives. So Imam al-Shafi'i continued studies, and his method of teaching his students contributed to a new set of fiqh methodology and positions. Okay, so his this method of how he was speaking to his students, okay, and the debates and the comparing writings and all this sort of stuff, it's what led to the rapid development of new positions within his fiqh. So Imam Ahmad was asked about Imam al-Shafi'i's books from Iraq and Egypt, and he said, focus on the books he wrote in Egypt. He wrote those originally in Iraq, but did not perfect them. He did that in Egypt. And Imam Rabi', who we're going to later on get next sort of session, we'll get into that. Imam al-Shafi'i remained here in Egypt for 4 years, dictating 1,500 waraqa. Okay, this does not mean page. It's a collection of pages. I forget how much that is. Published Al in 2000 waraqa, and Kitab al-Sunan and many others in those 4 years. During this whole period, he was very ill, especially the illness that led to his passing. Now he taught his most famous students here, Imam al-Bawaiti, Imam al-Muzani, and Imam al-Rabi'. And these are the ones who essentially carried his madhab forward after him. Now, besides his knowledge, he left behind a wife from the family of Uthman ibn Affan, Hamda bin Nafi', 3 children that we know of at least. In some biographies, actually, you don't find any details about his kids. You had Muhammad Zainab bin Fatima. He also had a son, Al-Hassan, from a slave girl who passed away in childhood. So it seems Imam al-Shafi'i also took some interest in medicine, similar to scholars later in Islamic history. Okay, again, to what extent? Not exactly sure. The information is not that detailed. Besides his knowledge, he was known for his worship, his excellent character, his respect from the people, his simplicity in clothing, and his beautiful recitation of the Quran. Rahimahullah. Now, Imam al-Shafi'i, before he passed away, let's talk a little bit about some of the difficulties he went through. It's important to understand that the awliya of Allah, the friends of Allah, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to test them in many ways, and scholars usually this is why they're tested as well. It's to prove essentially, how much that knowledge actually impacted them. So he experienced bankruptcy 3 times in his life, to the point where he had to sometimes sell his wife and children's belongings to make ends meet. Despite that, he was still known for his generosity and sadaqah. So it's not just Imam al-Shafi'i's knowledge and his academic sense that was the thing. It was his akhlaq, and also his taqwa and his amal, his acting upon his knowledge that were well known. Imam al-Shafi'i suffered from hemorrhoids in the last years of his life, and it prolonged to the point that his riding saddle would be filled with blood. Some of his students said, we did not see anyone who experienced illness the way al-Shafi'i did. So Imam al-Shafi'i was ill many times in his life, again, which shows that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Right? So essentially, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will, and of course the other verses in the Quran, أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَسَتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَى نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. So, do you think that you'll enter Jannah and you won't be tested the way the previous nations or the previous prophets were? Imam al-Shafi'i passed away in the last day of Rajab, 204 Hijri. Sorry, I made a mistake there. Really? I have to check that one. Okay. The night of Friday after praying Maghrib, he was prayed over and buried on Friday, and the crescent of Sha'ban was seen later that night. So yes, sorry, I made a mistake. Imam Shafi'i did not pass away in 201 Hijri, 204. Allah seemed to remember differently. It's possible my mind slipped. Either way, though, that means that he didn't spend 2 years in Egypt. He spent 5 years in Egypt. So, I teach history to young people, so I always like to do this where I talk about not just the history, but the lessons we get from it. And there are many, many in the story. I tried to get as many as I could. Okay, the first one, of course, is the role of the mother in developing the minds of children. Okay, I have a blog article on feminism, but essentially one of the problems is as parents become less focused on their children, mothers included, the problem is that it's the children who suffer the most harm, and we see this reflected in Imam al-Shafi'i's biography as well. Poverty and its effect on teaching and seeking knowledge. Specifically how poverty affects seekers of knowledge and scholars and students of knowledge, okay, in that it affects them negatively. It leaves them less able to do things, and it's Imam al-Shafi'i's, of course, tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was blessed by Allah, but also it's his persistence in his education and his learning that sort of allowed him to circumvent and bypass those obstacles of poverty, but not everyone's going to be able to do that. Importance of the Arabic language and humanities in general in developing the intellect. Imam al-Shafi'i's intellect was strongly linked to his skill and his proficiency in the Arabic language. And especially the Arabic language, like language and these kinds of things are essential to understanding. I have this post on the Usuli that if anyone on my Facebook page, somewhere on Twitter as well, that essentially the stronger you are in the Arabic language, the stronger you're going to be in the Islamic sciences. This is something my teachers told me, and ever since then I have found it to be true almost every single time. Okay, I noticed that the strongest scholars, the strongest students of knowledge, I dig a little deeper and find out they're very strong in the Arabic language as well. Okay, which is very important. Arabic literature versus Arabic sciences. Okay, this is more of an Arabic language point, but the importance of learning Arabic to a high level, is that it should lead to the study of Arabic literature, poetry, etc., because that's essentially where the language is, and the Arabic sciences are just stepping stones to getting to that level. The importance of learning from many teachers from different ways of thinking. This is very important. Some folks limit themselves to a certain band of teachers, or certain types of teachers, or certain teachers from certain types of thinking. And the problem with this is this never leads you to have that more independent mindset where you're able to think freely and sort of disconnect yourself from, just like blindly following your own teachers or blindly following a certain group of scholars. Okay, no, instead you should broaden your horizons, study from many different types of teachers, different places in the world as well, and you begin to understand things a lot better, and you don't get confined to a single way of thinking. Developing and changing in your views is evidence of learning. Okay, Imam al-Shafi'i's life is an example of this, from Maliki scholar to al-Madhhab al-Qadim, the old Madhhab, to al-Madhhab al-Jadid. Okay, very important in essentially learning further and enhancing your views and enhancing your learning in order to progress, and the evidence for that is that your views will change over time. Prolonging exposure to scholars with great or unique benefit. Okay, sometimes we're going to come across teachers that are very beneficial to us, and it's important to stick to them as much as possible. And, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correct any deficiencies in us in this regard. The irrelevance of age to mastery. Okay, so old versus young teachers. Mastery in learning, mastery in knowledge comes from mastery in knowledge. Okay, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the old will always be superior to the young. It does in many cases. In most cases, I would say the older scholars obviously have spent more time, they have more experience, more knowledge, more reading, more learning under their belt. But sometimes you might find the odd younger scholar who, is an upcoming sort of prodigy and way more advanced in their learning, or at least show a much faster rate of learning than older scholars. Continuing studies while being a teacher. There's other stories I can mention here. So Imam al-Shafi'i, while he was a teacher, was still studying at the same time. Becoming a teacher, becoming a scholar, even a high-level scholar like Imam al-Shafi'i, a mujtahid mutlaq, did not mean he stopped learning. Did not mean he stopped benefiting from other people. So the story of Khidr in Imam Muslim as well. Okay, you can, Imam Muslim story, I have again, Khidr alayhi salam, that's an easy story. You can look up in the Quran, right, with Musa alayhi salam. That Musa alayhi salam was sent to Khidr alayhi salam to show him how much, he had left to learn, or how much he could learn in addition to the knowledge he had already from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Imam Muslim had already finished writing his book, the Sahih. The scholar, we're talking the scholar Hadith here, Imam Muslim, the author of the Sahih, he had already finished writing that, and then after that he studied with Imam Bukhari, which is very important. It shows again that just because somebody becomes a teacher, nowadays because teaching is associated with a position, we don't realize that knowledge is a journey. Even while we're teachers, we should and can still be learning with others as well. Then the importance of exposure to different cultures and peoples. Okay, very important. Imam al-Shafi'i mentioned the Baghdad example and his exposure to the Christians in Najran, for example. Learning being a conversation. Okay, the importance of respectful debate and discussion, the process of learning, which has all been gone from social media, right? So learning is a conversation. If we cannot have conversations, we cannot learn. Right, very important. If we cannot have conversations, we cannot learn. And this sort of respectful debate and discussion must happen in order for us to progress in our learning. And number 12, respect the process. Okay, this is something I teach, alhamdulillah, quite a few people, right? And this is one of the main problems I find in younger students. They're impatient with the process. Learning is a process. Okay, even university degrees are years long, and they're full-time course loads as well. You have to respect the process of learning. Start from the beginning, go through it methodically, follow your teachers, make sure you have a good teachers, and then you follow the teachers' guidance in how to learn, and respect the process, respect the effort as well required, and you will reap the benefits, you'll reap the fruit. If you try to rush things, okay, whether using technology or something else, then, Jazakumullah khair, I just saw 204 is correct. Okay, inshallah. So yeah, if you respect the process, okay, and you respect the effort required as well, you reap the benefits. You try to rush things, you take shortcuts, the benefit acquired will be much less. Teaching as learning. Okay, so teaching also functions as a way of learning. Waiting to mature until you publish or write anything. Okay, this is aimed at myself. I started writing things online after I left studying abroad, and I often wish that I had waited a lot longer until I did that. The importance of writing in the process of learning and teaching too. However, Imam al-Shafi'i was writing books already in his Madhhab al-Qadim. He didn't, just because he changed his views later in Egypt, didn't stop him from writing when he was in Iraq. And writing is a great way, especially research-based writing. It's an amazing way to learn and to acquire knowledge by itself. Number 16, getting permission to teach. So Imam al-Shafi'i did not start giving fatwa, did not start teaching until his teachers in Mecca encouraged him to do so. Right? So this is very important. We need to make sure that we are ready for teaching, and the best way to do that is to get input from our teachers, who themselves, recognize aptitude when they see it, and they can guide us on that. Traveling for studying and teaching. Okay, this is difficult nowadays, but at the very least, okay, some effort should be made in traveling and teaching, even if it's just for a little bit. And nowadays, though we have online classes, we can try to benefit as much from those as well. Now, For the Sufis, the scholars of Tasawwuf, they often mentioned that hardship and difficulties, these are opportunities to rise in station, rise in rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and these are not obstacles. And we can see this in Imam al-Shafi'i's life, the illnesses he had, the difficulties he went through, for example, in, with the government, for example. These were not things that lowered him in rank, rather they raised him in rank to what he is today. To this day, Muslims talk about Imam al-Shafi'i, they learn about him, even those who disagree with him or follow different madhabs, they still talk about Imam al-Shafi'i with reverence. And all the hardship that Imam al-Shafi'i went through, this was and of course now we're seeing it, subhanAllah, in Gaza as well, that Muslims there are high in rank with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, because of the difficulties and the hardships that they're going through. Then we have number 19, critical study versus memorization and or false cult learning. This is Imam al-Shafi'i's sort of critical research project in Egypt, and the sort of memorization, just going beyond just memorizing hadith, for example, right? And also some people, the way they learn Islam is very isolated, very insulated. There's no critical understanding. There's no asking questions and, asking discussing issues on pointed stuff. So essentially, okay, this is another issue as well that we learn from this, that the benefit and the importance of that sort of discussion-based critical learning. Epistemic courage, learning and revising our beliefs continually. Okay, we shouldn't be afraid to seek new knowledge and understand where we were going wrong before. If you just keep learning the same stuff from the same people over and over again, it's just going to reinforce the same thing. You're not learning anything, you're going deeper into a hole. Scholars and speaking the truth, okay, between obligation and wisdom. So there is an obligation on scholars to speak out, but at the same time, sometimes, it's better to avoid it. Again, it depends on the scholar, depends on the situation, depends on the context. Imam al-Shafi'i left Baghdad as opposed to, sort of dealing with the problems there, because first of all, there are already people there talking about this issue. But on top of that, it just wasn't suited to what he was trying to accomplish in his life. The blind following of teachers versus following the truth and maintaining adab. Okay, so blindly following scholars is different from following the truth while still maintaining adab. Imam al-Shafi'i had great teachers and he had great adab towards his students and towards his teachers as well, but at the same time they didn't stop him from thinking differently from them, disagreeing with them as well. Okay, there's something I didn't mention here, which is there was this one time where Imam al-Shafi'i essentially disagreed with Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani and critiqued him on some points he made. Okay, and since that was the nature of learning in that place, he had no problem with it. Recognizing the people of knowledge by knowledge. So Imam Muhammad Hassan al-Shaybani, how did he recognize Imam al-Shafi'i when he interceded on his behalf in the case with the Abbasid government? He talked about Imam al-Shafi'i's knowledge and he said this is not a person who you need to come after, okay? But essentially, you recognize the people of knowledge by their knowledge. Imam al-Shafi'i was not well known until people had witnessed his knowledge and witnessed his understanding and seen him for who he was. Now then, start local, then study outside. Okay, this is important. Is it really about learning, or is it seeking knowledge culture? Right? Seeking knowledge culture is what? That you have to travel abroad and study? No, make use of where you are. Imam al-Shafi'i made use of where he was in Mecca first, before he traveled to Medina to study with Imam Malik. And lastly, the importance of action alongside knowledge. Okay, now, that's very important as well. Imam al-Shafi'i's generosity, and we haven't spoken about his wisdoms and his ibadah as well, which I will likely do, because it's already almost an hour. I'll likely do this in the next session. Okay, this is very informal. Okay, I tried to keep this informal, and this is very similar to my teaching. I'm not a YouTuber, right? So this is more classroom style and more teaching style. Whoever listens to it, let them benefit, inshallah, and whoever doesn't, it's okay. Okay, so if you have any questions, you can ask on my Facebook page, okay, or Twitter, etc., and I'll try to answer them there. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.